Hello, college football fans. Welcome to episode 66 of College Football Throwdown. I'm your co-host, Alex Schmitz, and today I'm joined by my dad, Peter Schmitz.
Hey, college football fans and Husker fans.
Hey. And I believe you're still reporting from the Schmitz RV in Nevada. Is that correct?
That is correct. We are settled in here, and we spent yesterday in Tahoe, Lake Tahoe, being able to visit that area for the first time, and it was awesome.
Nice.
Your mother and I had a great day. Ended it with some great pizza at a bar up there, a brewery that we really enjoyed and hope to go back to before we're done with our time here in Reno area.
That's great. Glad you're enjoying it up there. And this is, of course, College Football Throwdown, a college football podcast by college football fans for college football fans. We're here this week to talk about the Nebraska-Ohio State game, as well as some recruiting news for the Huskers and some of the big games that happened in this past week. There were actually a lot in Week 10, and the playoff rankings will be coming out tomorrow on Tuesday from when we're recording this, but we'll talk a little bit about how those rankings are going to change now based on these results. But before we dive into all that, I believe you have our beverage to crack.
I do. So we can go ahead and do that because it's always good to be liquefied while we're having this discussion. Oh, wow, that was good. Did you hear that one?
Yeah, it sounded nice and fresh.
It was, and it's cold.
All right. Yep, so now we were at this Ohio State game for Nebraska, which is one that even before the season started, you could pencil in basically as a loss. Ohio State has been very dominant in the Big Ten for the past decade or so. And we gave our predictions on last week's podcast. I predicted being pessimistic, I predicted a 56-24 victory for Ohio State, whereas you went a little lower, 45-17. And we turned out to both be wrong, despite the fact that Ohio State was coming off of a loss to Purdue and had a bye week to prepare for this game. They did make some mistakes on their end, and we were able to drive the ball against them on several different occasions and look quite dominant over their defense.
That's right. And I've had the opportunity to rewatch that game, at least portions of it, and it really is. It makes you start to kick yourself when you think of the missed opportunities that were there. Things that if we had just done this or this right, that the snowball might have flowed even more so in our direction, and it might have been enough to get us over the hump and allow us to maybe even win the game. But ultimately in the second half, Ohio State emerged and stabilized with their running game and their superior talent there kind of emerged. So I don't know that it would have changed it. It might have just caused them to shift into that mode a little sooner than they did, for all I know. But bottom line, though, is you could see a dramatic difference between the Nebraska of the Ohio State game and the Nebraska that we saw earlier in the season, say, against, Troy or particularly the Michigan game where we played another, outstanding football team and were just physically overmatched and mentally overmatched completely. In this game, we still had a physical disadvantage, but we were not mentally overmatched anymore. We now had, the mental capacity and toughness to at least hang in there and fight.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I was impressed with the fact the final score ended up being 36-31. I was impressed by the fact that our defensive line, despite the obvious physical advantages that Ohio State has in terms of their offensive line, we did force them quite frequently to run to the outside rather than up the middle. And I remember the announcer saying, Ohio State should be able to run it up the middle, against this team. And the fact that they're not must be frustrating, Urban Meyer. So, there were some areas where I was definitely surprised. And there were series where, especially there in the second half, our offense kind of stuttered for a while. We just weren't getting anything going. But then there in the fourth quarter, things started to click. You'll recall that last drive that we got the chance to have was a really efficient, we scored in 7 plays or something like that, just drove it down the field. and got the points quick. So it kind of, once again, that kind of, regrets, if there was a little bit more time on the clock and we'd be able to get it back, get the ball back there. I feel like we had some momentum that we might have been able to score again and go up. And of course, there was that freshman mistake by Martinez where we were near the goal line and he threw a very bad interception. That's the one you really wish you could have back.
Well, and that's true. There's others too, Alex. There are the blocked punt that led to their first points as a safety. Just all the other physical and mental mistakes that we did. That if you just take a few of those away, maybe things are different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you're right. Special teams was one area where I know Scott Frost was disappointed. Yeah, they definitely won that battle, and those 2 points at the safety ended up being important because we kept it close up until the end. Looking at the stats, one thing that I thought was pretty interesting. Overall, we were pretty even in terms of stats. 450 total yards for us, 481 for them. We had quite a bit more time of possession. 33 minutes to 26 minutes for them. Pretty even in terms of penalties. Fumbles, we had 2 fumbles and lost 1. They had 6 fumbles and lost 2. You'll recall that there were several where it kind of popped out and then their guys got it right back. But there were some close calls.
There were. Well, and one of those fumbles was a muffed punt. And usually a muffed punt like that, almost always the other team gets it, right? Because the ball goes through the guy's arms and you got all these other players that are running in that direction. So usually there's a real advantage to the coverage team when there is a muffed punt. And yet the ball bounced just right, so it went right back into his hands and he just fell on it.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And here's another interesting statistic for both sides. We were 4 of 14 on third downs, while they were 3 of 9. So for both teams, when they got put into third down situations, it was tough for them to convert, which goes to show that when both offenses were moving, both teams were kind of getting big plays off, or scoring on getting first downs on the second down, and not even getting to a third very often. And another interesting stat was red zone scoring chances. They were 3 of 4, we were 5 of 6. And I'm pretty sure that the one that we didn't get was that interception that I mentioned earlier by Martinez. So that goes to show that when we got into the red zone, we were basically always able to convert, which is a good sign, I would say.
I agree. I agree completely. Lots of good things to see when you look into the details of the game. At the end of the day, though, we still have this penchant for not playing well at the end. And that's something that winning attitude, that winning mentality still needs to be built. And that's probably one of the hardest things that a young team that's learning a new system has to fight through. And that's why this upcoming game is going to be really important. And when we get to talking about that later, it's what do we do with this good feeling and good performance that many players individually had in this game? How do we leverage that to the next game so that we can actually start winning games?
Right. Yep. Like we said, it's, you look back at those missed opportunities and it's definitely disappointing given how close we were to getting the upset. But at the same time, when you look at, our score predictions, that we were worried about a potential blowout like the Michigan game. So the fact that we were able to play them close up until the end and be respectable, and show that improvement, which we've been talking about all season, this is another step along that path. And I think the guys can pat themselves on the back for that, that they competed with a good football team. Though I would say that, Ohio State was -2 to us in terms of turnovers because they also had an interception, whereas we didn't. They definitely played sloppier than you would expect of an Urban Meyer coached Ohio State. So they do seem to be, to me, a little bit down this year compared to Michigan when that game comes up at the end of the year.
I would agree. I mean, I think unless something significant happens between now and when they play each other, I suspect that Michigan is going to be the team that's playing at a higher level, but you never know. That's why they play the games, right? I mean, no one would have guessed that Nebraska would have had the halftime lead and been leading, Ohio State for a good bit of the game, and then made it interesting at the end again. So you gotta understand that you're dealing with kids that are 18 to 22, 23 years old at the most, and the same thing doesn't happen every week.
Yeah, that's for sure. And so on last week's podcast, we had brought up briefly some recruiting news that has happened for Nebraska recently, but we didn't really get time to dive into that last week. So we're going to insert that in here. Why don't you get us going on that?
Okay. Well, so the thing is that we had a number of opportunities to what do I want to say? There were a lot of kids who were making decisions in the previous, say, 10-day period, and so all of them were interested in Nebraska, and many of them were viewed as players that we thought we had a decent chance of getting. Now the reality is that these are players that we don't know how they're going to turn out when they actually get here to play, but in terms of how this whole recruiting thing goes, people tend to look at stars and rankings and all those kinds of things. But also you look at who are the other teams that are recruiting these athletes, and that's a critical measure that I often look to, not in a vacuum, but as part of the total package of information. And so we've had some guys that we've been after for a long time, and so they're folks that our coaches had invested a lot of recruiting energy and money and effort into. And so those are ones, you want those to pan out for you. Obviously, when you swing and miss, all that investment, all that effort is kind of for naught. Not that it goes to waste, because you still built a relationship with maybe the coach from that high school, and there's some other good things that can, come out of that. But the bottom line is when you put that kind of effort in, it's awful important. And we were in on 4 guys that were significant in this last week. Now it's been a week and a half, I guess. But Javin Wright was a player who was a legacy for Nebraska. His dad had played at Nebraska, been a very, very successful football player at Nebraska, and played in the NFL. Toby Wright is his name, and his son, Javin Wright, who is a defensive back from Arizona, was a guy that we've been recruiting for quite some time. And most people felt that Nebraska was going to be his final destination. So we've been kind of the team to beat, so to speak. But he had gotten offers from a lot of the Pac-12 schools, including UCLA, who was a strong contender, because obviously they have some connections with the Chip Kelly and Nebraska. There's connections all over between him and Scott, kind of similar offenses, that sort of thing. But ultimately, Javin's dad's tie to Nebraska did rule the day, and he ultimately decided to commit to Nebraska. So that was a big win, because we had invested a lot of time and effort and obviously knew about Javin because he was Toby's son for a long time. In addition, there was an offensive lineman who we were after, and so were almost all the other Big Ten schools, Michigan, Wisconsin, Iowa, Minnesota. All of them were after this young man from Minnesota. He's a monster of a guy in terms of his build, his structure. He's a 6'9", 300-pound tackle, and we really are in desperate need of recruiting tackles. In fact, I'm sure he's not going to be the last one we get this year if we have our way. But he is the prototypical tackle that Coach Frost was looking for, because he's got that big frame, and even though he's 6'9", he actually has pretty darn good feet, and so he moves well. And if I can say this, he's only 300 pounds at 6'9", and being 300 pounds, he's not one of these guys where you're going to have to reshape his body because he's kind of round along the middle. This is a guy that actually is fairly svelte as offensive tackles go. So, and he was a guy that we had invested an enormous amount of time in. And then thirdly, there was an athlete wide receiver out of Washington who many services have as a 4-star. So Bryce Benhart, the offensive lineman, and Darren Chase, the athlete, wide receiver from Vancouver, Washington. Those two on some services were regarded as 4-star athletes, and Javin Wright was pretty much a consensus 3-star type athlete, but still highly regarded. And you love his frame. Javin's a 6'3" defensive back. So whenever you can get a guy that's 6'3" and is targeted to be a defensive back, depending on how much he fills out, he might end up being a linebacker with a 6'3" frame. And so these guys all have the body and shape and physique that you're looking for, and they're guys that our coaches have been on for a long time. And so that makes it a really big week. Now, there was a fourth guy that ended up not choosing us, and there, of course, he was one of the most highly regarded players. He was someone we invested a bunch of time in. And it's just one of those things. It gets frustrating a little bit when things happen, because the coaches felt very good about where we were at with this young man. And then in an 11th hour issue got brought in that hadn't even been addressed on his official visit or anything like that, where all of a sudden he was looking for some additional insight into how he was going to be used and where he would fall on the depth chart and things of that nature. And so that kind of created some doubt, and ultimately led this young man to, because of some other influences that kind of came in at this last minute, this 11th hour, that ended up causing him to change his direction that we thought he was going to be going in, and many of the experts in this field of recruiting had thought he was going to be going in, and he ended up going to Kentucky, or verbally committing to Kentucky. Now, there's a chance, obviously, nobody's signed anything yet, so this is only a verbal commitment at this point, and so things could change again. But I have a feeling that the ship has sailed a little bit on that because of the contentious nature of the issue that was raised. But these other three guys, I think, are all pretty solid. I mean, I don't feel like we're going to be chasing them necessarily. So it puts us up to for a total in recruiting class of 20 commitments. So we've already got a pretty solid number of recruits that are committed to us. It's a good group. I wouldn't call it a great group. It's not loaded with difference makers necessarily, but I think it's a very, very sound group, and it's guys that fit what Coach Frost and his team, his staff, are looking for. So even though the ranking might not be as high as ultimately that Nebraska fans would like to see, long term, it's something that I think will keep us in the mix, and certainly keep us in the mix within the Big Ten West over these next couple of years. And you hope that maybe some more on the field success will open the doors to that next level of recruit, and maybe guys like Wandale Robinson, who switched his commitment from us to Kentucky, we won't lose guys. But you like to see all the time and effort from the coaches kind of start to pay off, and it just seems like we have built some pretty darn good momentum here in late October that hopefully carries through the month of November. Because remember, we're going to have an early signing period again here in December, and so the majority of these 20 athletes that we already have committed are going to be able to sign at that time. Mm-hmm. And there's 5 or 6 in here that are players that are either junior college players or players who plan to graduate from their high school at semester. And so those are all kids that can be basically brought forward to the previous year's class, because we had some unused scholarships from the previous year. And so we'll be able to then continue to recruit. So now, with that being said, it's looking like this can be a class that is at 20 right now, could potentially grow to, say, 27, 28, 29 players even. So we've got quite a few positions still to fill.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, it'll be interesting to see how the early signing period plays into everything now that that's a rule established within college football. And I'd say, especially considering that we're sitting at a 2-7 record right now, getting 3 out of the 4 recruits you were looking at right here in this period is not a bad takeaway.
Correct.
I feel like hopefully players are seeing, the enthusiasm coming from the players who are on the team, and the turnaround that the offense has started to make, and what the potential kind of for this program is for when they're, in the system.
Right. Absolutely. I think that again, Scott has spent a lot of time talking about culture, and I think it's beginning to show up, and people can see it, and that's exciting.
Yep, for sure. All right. Was there anything else recruiting wise you wanted to talk about, or should we move into the Week 10 results?
We can work. Let's look at Week 10 results.
All right. So we actually gave several predictions last week because there were so many big games coming up. And the biggest game, the marquee game, was number 1 Alabama playing number 3 LSU. I went with my gut, or my brain rather, and predicted an Alabama victory of 28-21, whereas you predicted with your heart. You said with your heart, not your brain, given that it was at LSU's stadium at night, and you predicted an LSU victory, not giving a score. But the final score ended up being a 29-0 shutout by Alabama.
Yeah, it was a statement game. They called it Statement Weekend, and old Nick Saban took that seriously.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think I saw somebody joking like that at the little interview or press conference afterwards. He said like I was satisfied with that game, and everyone was like, "What? He never says that."
Exactly.
I
Exactly.
I I I was kind of keeping an eye on the score, and I was planning on like maybe tuning into it if I saw at halftime that it was close, but it was not close, and that was very clear. We knew that LSU's best defensive player was going to be out of the first half of the game due to a previous targeting penalty from the last game. But of course, the defensive player isn't going to help your offense, and the fact that they weren't able to get anything going against Alabama's defense was clearly the biggest problem they were facing.
Exactly. They couldn't. Yeah, they were ineffective. It really wasn't even that entertaining a game, if you ask me, because it was pretty obvious who was in control of the game.
Right. So, with such a dominant performance like that, do you think there's any real doubt in your mind that Alabama's gonna be in the playoff this year?
Oh, Alabama will be in the playoff. And the bigger concern now is that with the victory, with that kind of victory over LSU, and even if we say they were to lose to Auburn in their annual rivalry game there at the end of the season, the reality is they are probably still in the top four, and the committee probably still puts them in, even if they were to lose. I don't think they will, but even if they did, because everybody else is going to have one loss. I mean, would they choose Alabama, or would they choose a one-loss Michigan or a one-loss Oklahoma? If those are the three schools you came down to,
Right.
you know what I mean? If you're dealing with a one-loss situation, so the reality is Alabama is almost certainly in that mix, and unless Clemson stubs their toe, Clemson looks to be kind of in that mix too.
Right. Well, yeah, but don't forget that Alabama, if they lost to Auburn, I would assume they would still play in the championship game.
Correct.
And so, if I would assume it would be Georgia right there in the other division.
Probably it'll probably be Georgia. Yeah.
Right, because they beat Kentucky this weekend. So,
Mm-hmm.
if Georgia could find a way to beat them, then they might be the one to sneak in there instead.
True. Yeah. Well, that's what I'm saying. I'm assuming even if you had a somebody other than Alabama win the conference, Alabama, if they're only a one-loss team, is going to get into the playoff, and that's the scary part.
Yeah, well, we'll have to see how things play out because what we brought up last week is still true. LSU was like the first like legit team Alabama has played like all year, and they this upcoming weekend they play Mississippi State, who's like in like the 20s. So they're not
Right.
they're not a pushover team, but certainly also a team that Alabama should win. That would be the expectation.
Agreed. Yep.
And then they
Yep.
play Auburn at the end of the year, but Auburn is kind of having a down year this year. So you wouldn't expect that to be a huge challenge for them either. So it really comes down to that championship game for the Marbles, I think.
I would agree.
All right. One of the other big games that we gave predictions on was Michigan Penn State. Both of us predicted Michigan victory. I said 31-24. You said 24-17. But another more lopsided victory, 42-7.
Jeez, yeah.
Quite a dominant performance by Michigan's defense. And, it seems like, Harbaugh, he's had some struggles in his opening years at Michigan, but it feels like this is the year where things are finally starting to click for him and the team.
Yeah, well, he's got a quarterback that is more than just a game manager. He's a guy that's a playmaker, a guy that can make things happen, and I think that's elevating everything around him offensively. They made some changes on their offensive staff, bringing in a new offensive line coach, an old veteran who's well respected, and he's really starting to make an impact on that offensive line now that they're getting a little deeper into the season. And so Michigan's offensive line is starting to play a lot better than they used to. The talent's always been there, but now they're playing better, and that's the big key.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and they always for all of Harbaugh's time, they've been great.
Yeah, and it's also worth noting that with Penn State, they did their star quarterback was injured, playing with like a dinged up knee. Is that right?
Yeah, that's definitely true. But I mean, there was a lot more. They had a lot more issues than just that at Penn State during the game. But yes, that diminished their chance of being competitive greatly when you know that the quarterback is not going to be playing at his normal higher level of performance.
Okay. Yep. And so going it just real quick with the college football playoff, I think it's pretty clear LSU is going to fall because of their dominant loss, their bad loss. So now it will be Alabama 1, Clemson 2, Notre Dame 3, and Michigan 4, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. I think Oklahoma won, so Oklahoma's in that one loss mix too. But Oklahoma won in a back and forth battle royale where they kind of had to come from behind a few times and stuff. And although they put up a lot of points, again they exposed themselves as being a flawed team. And Michigan put in its most complete performance of the season. So I think as that committee meets and evaluates again all the data up to this point, they're going to look at it and say, "Yep, Michigan's the one that deserves the nod." Now, it'll be interesting to see what happens with Notre Dame because they just got done with their game with Northwestern. And even though they came out and it looked like it was going to be a blowout, then they allowed Northwestern to kind of hang around and sneak back into it and get things close again, and then ultimately pulled away again at the end. But it was a battle. I mean, it was not a complete game by Notre Dame, And so I think that starts to factor in here a little bit too. If you anticipate that at some point Notre Dame loses a game, not that I necessarily think they're going to, but I'm just saying as you're looking at the different scenarios, because if Notre Dame doesn't lose, then effectively you've got your ACC champion, which is likely to be Clemson, and you have your SEC champion, which is likely to be Alabama, and then you have Notre Dame in. So you got three teams that are already in out of the four. So you got Michigan. Oh, well, you got the Big Ten teams, the Pac-12 teams, and the Big 12 teams fighting for a final spot. And two of those leagues are going to be left on the outside looking in.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's looking like the likely play out here. And I think if it does play out that way, barring something crazy happening with like Michigan or Oklahoma, I think it would be between those two teams, and the Pac-12 would not even really be in the conversation because I'm pretty sure all their teams have at least 2 losses, don't they? They're big teams.
Who, Pac-12?
Yeah.
Yeah. No. I think they have some one-loss teams, but I would agree with you that I don't think any of them are going to be in the mix. I think it's ultimately going to be about the Big 12 champion if it's Oklahoma, and the Big 10 champion if it's either Ohio State or Michigan.
You're right. Yeah, you're right. Actually, Washington State only has 1 loss currently, so they're still.
But I think they'll end up with another loss, though. They almost lost this weekend.
Yes, they did. So just going over some of those scores real quick. Notre Dame won 31-21 over Northwestern. Oklahoma Texas Tech was a shootout, like you said, 51-46 victory. Georgia beat Kentucky 34-17, which broke Kentucky's undefeated streak, so they'll definitely fall in the rankings. And then what was the last team you just mentioned?
Washington State.
Well, right, and Washington State beat Cal 19-13, so another close game, like you said.
Yep.
And one of the last game that we gave a score prediction on was Purdue Iowa, another important Big Ten game, and we both predicted Iowa victory. I predicted lower scoring 21-14, whereas you said 38-31, which ended up being closer to the final score. But Purdue was the one who actually won the day with a field goal at the end to clinch it for them.
Right, and that puts things in a real wrench here. I mean, it kind of helps Northwestern a little bit because Northwestern has that win over Purdue, and if Purdue hadn't lost to Michigan State, they'd have been really right in the thick of it. But that puts Iowa at a bit of a difficulty being a real contender in the Big Ten West. So it's pretty much down to Northwestern and maybe Wisconsin if Northwestern were to lose. I think Northwestern has to play Iowa this week, and so that's going to be a big game for Northwestern and Iowa.
Yep, you are correct about that. It is Iowa this weekend, and
it's at Iowa too, isn't it? If you're looking at it,
I'm pulling it up right now. Let's see.
Okay.
It is yes, at Iowa.
See, and so that's going to be a hugely important game for Iowa. I mean, their season will kind of fall apart a little bit if they don't win this game at home. And yet, Northwestern just keeps finding a way, even against, again, the fourth-ranked team from last week was Notre Dame, and Northwestern got them to the ropes, man. And they did it with just mistake-free football. I think going late in the fourth quarter, I saw the stat on penalties, 0 for 0. Northwestern had not been called for one penalty.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I can't remember the last time a Nebraska football team was in that situation ever. You know what I mean? Even in the Tom Osborne era, it would have been back then. It'd have been in the 90s sometime that we would have had a game where we had no penalties.
Right.
So that's how Northwestern beats you. They just are disciplined, and they let you beat yourself.
Yeah.
They let you make enough mistakes over the course of the game, and then they try to maximize advantage when you make them.
Right. Well, I just think that's interesting that, the Northwestern team who played it close with Notre Dame is a team that we were up against, by 10 points and had basically had beat, until we let them come back at the end. So, goes to show, that, our offense is legit, and can compete with some of the good teams out there. But B, also, I was kind of hinting to this before the podcast, this is kind of an interesting year for the Big Ten, where like some of the expected powers like Wisconsin or Iowa or Michigan State, they're kind of having some down, Penn State having some more down years, and then you see some of these kind of more mid-tier teams like Purdue and Northwestern having much better years, and their talent is kind of emerging more.
Right. Yeah, I would agree. I would absolutely agree. So it's going to be interesting to see. These next 3 weeks are going to obviously tell the tale where for what direction are certain programs heading in. I think that's the big thing for Nebraska is it feels like we're turning a corner, but we're just not quite getting it done yet. And so are we going to turn it enough that we're going to start winning some of these games at the end here, or I mean, I could see a scenario where we go 0-3, and I could see a scenario where we could go 3-0, and it's not that the line is not that thick between those two.
Yeah, no, it's going to be interesting to see for sure. We'll talk about the upcoming Illinois game here in a bit for Nebraska. But there are a couple more games from Week 10 I want to mention. A big one being Missouri and Florida. Florida lost 38-17, which I made the point that kind of hurt LSU's schedule a little more because they lost to Florida earlier in the year.
Right.
Although, am I correct in that the score sheet said that like Florida had lost to Mizzou in the past as well?
Oh yeah, since Missouri had become part of the league, because you may recall that that Florida had a couple of other years that they've struggled, that's why they're dealing with a new coach this year. And Missouri, if you'll recall, won the SEC. I guess it would be called the West or East Division of the SEC, or maybe it's called the Coastal Division. I can't remember the actual term, but Missouri is actually part of the Eastern Division of the SEC, and they've won that division twice since they joined the league. And so they've had some success against Florida since joining the SEC conference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I kind of miss the Missouri games from our time in the Big 12.
In the Big 12, yes,
yeah,
I agree.
They were a good rival for us back then.
They were.
And then another one I think we both got to see part of was the West Virginia-Texas game, which was I tuned in for like the last 5 minutes or so, and so I got to see both teams scoring. You know, it was like a tie game, and then Texas scored, and then West Virginia managed to score, and then their coach decided to go for two to close it all out, and they managed to get it. It was a great ending to the game.
Yeah. Yes. And West Virginia ended up winning the game.
Yep. 42 to 41.
Yes.
Definitely a ballsy call, I thought, by their head coach. I know that the defense had struggled, and so he kind of felt, we've got this momentum. I'm confident in our offense. We can score here and now to, win the game.
Well, and then they did it. They went out and they scored the 2-point conversion, and was it on the 2-point conversion where Texas got that super last second
timeout? Yes,
timeout, but then the play ran anyway. So now the scheme, the formation, and the actual play was now exposed. West Virginia had to go to their second choice because they had just shown their cards on the first choice because of that late. That's why they don't usually let that kind of a timeout happen. On a field goal, they'll let that happen. When it's a snap of the ball and they're planning to run the football run a play, usually refs ignore and swallow the whistle and let the play finish, and they don't give a head coach that opportunity, because it's crap to try to time it up like that. Mm-hmm. And leave it to Texas to try to do some stupid schemey thing like that.
Yep, but West Virginia, then they pulled out a different play. The quarterback ran it in for a touchdown. It was cool to see. It was reminding me, obviously not nearly the same stakes, but kind of a little reminiscent to me of the 2-point conversion for Tom Osborne back in the day. Very different circumstances in terms of the rules and the situation and everything. But I just admire a coach that kind of has the guts to, put it all out there like that.
Exactly. And strategy-wise, that I think that the problem is that the traditional coaching book would say, you're at home, you kick the field goal, the extra point, you tie it, and you take your chances in overtime because you're at home. But if you're away from home, then and you've got the momentum, then you just seize the momentum and take it and go with it. Mm-hmm. And so I don't even remember where that was, whether that was at Texas or West Virginia. But regardless, it's a gutsy call when you decide to do that, rather because there's an awful lot of coaches that would go the conservative route and just kick the extra point and trust their team to win it in overtime. But I liked the way that it played out, obviously, because I'm not a fan of Texas.
No, not fans. Although I was kind of thinking that if Texas had won, it would have caused even more chaos in the Big 12, because then West Virginia would have 2 losses.
Yep.
And so it hurts their playoff chances more had Texas won that.
That's true.
And then last game to mention, another upset. Utah got upset by Arizona State, 38-20. I just watched a little recap of it, and I don't know if you saw the crazy interception that happened there, but
I did not. I didn't get any highlights from that game, and that's worthy of a mention because of Arizona State's new coach. Darn it, his name has escaped me right at the moment, but he was out of coaching for a considerable period of time. He was an NFL coach, but then became a commentator and worked for ESPN for more than a decade. I'm going to say 12, 16 years, somewhere in there. Okay. Herm Edwards
Yep,
is his
that's
name.
it.
And anyway, when he got the job at Arizona State, people thought that was kind of an off the beaten path choice because this guy had so long ago, since he had been a coach, and to switch from the professional ranks to the collegiate ranks, and having to deal with recruiting and having relationships with high school coaches and all that sort of stuff. And yet he has shown himself. They've won some good games this year, and he has really done a lot. Now, he didn't inherit an empty cupboard down there at Arizona State. He actually inherited some talent, and he's making use of it. But I think some people are going to be eating some crow on that particular hire if he continues to do as well as he does. He's kind of a bloviator. He's a guy that, I mean, you kind of love to hear him talk for a while, but then it's like, okay, shut up. We've got enough, but he's got so much passion, so much energy that it's almost infectious, and it looks like his team is starting to embrace that. And as long as things are going well, I think that works. If you start to struggle, that kind of passion can get in the way, and people can kind of start tuning out. But he's had enough success that it's building momentum for them, and I think it's kind of neat to see.
Yeah,
because he's not a young guy. I mean, he's certainly at the farther end of his career, and for him to have that kind of immediate success is exactly what that athletic director needed to happen for him, for that hire to make sense.
Yep. Yeah, I just looked it up. You're right. They beat Michigan State earlier this year, and they beat USC. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So they've had some big upsets.
They have.
All right. And so then looking ahead to the week 11 for college football, it's kind of interesting. It's not nearly as stacked in terms of like big, high-profile games amongst the top-ranked teams like last time, but it's a lot of kind of important battles within conferences. Like you mentioned with Northwestern Iowa, Ohio State plays Michigan State, Penn State plays Wisconsin. You have Oklahoma State playing Oklahoma, Oregon playing Utah, Auburn playing Georgia. There's some Texas playing Texas Tech after Tech just gave Oklahoma a good fight. So there's some good games.
What's the Oklahoma State? Oklahoma State's playing who?
Oklahoma.
Really? Bedlam is this weekend.
Yep.
Oh, I did not know that. Holy cow. Okay. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So yeah, that is gonna be an interesting week in the Big 12. That's a huge week in the Big 12, and those Big 10 games. That Wisconsin Penn State game's an interesting one because you kind of question how healthy. What's his name? The quarterback for Penn State, Mick whatever.
McSorley.
McSorley. Yeah. How healthy is he going to be? And looking at your list there, if you can still see that, is that Wisconsin game at Wisconsin?
I'll have to look that up here. I write things down on paper, you see, Dad. I'm a little old school in that regard.
I like that.
But I'll give it a quick Google here. Some of the other interesting games: Clemson plays Boston College, Florida State plays Notre Dame, and then we mentioned before Mississippi State, Alabama, South Carolina plays Florida. So like not like big games like Kentucky, Georgia, or LSU, Auburn, or LSU, Alabama like last week, but important games within conferences.
Right, absolutely. Wow.
The Penn State it is versus Wisconsin, so I guess it is at Penn State then.
Okay. Cool.
Home game for that.
Cool.
Yep.
I like it.
Wow. So we got all that, and then of course the biggest one of all would be the Nebraska game against Illinois.
Yes, that's the biggest one.
Of course. Who played against Minnesota last week and beat them 55-31, with a lot of rushing yards and some dominant offense, rather similar to the score we ended up putting up against Minnesota. So they
Right.
are.
And Minnesota's fired their defensive coordinator as a result of that game. And
Oh,
ironically, Illinois fired their defensive coordinator after getting shellacked by somebody the previous week. And so now Lovie Smith, the head coach, is the acting defensive coordinator for Illinois.
ah.
Uh,
Actually, looking at their schedule, Maryland beat them 63-33 the past
yeah,
week.
there you go. So that's what it was. So after the Maryland game, Lovey's defensive coordinator resigned. Actually, he didn't get fired. Lovey didn't fire him, but the guy just stepped away because he threw his hands up and said, "I can't do this."
Mm-hmm.
um, and Lovey stepped in. So that puts a little bit of a twist in it for Nebraska because we're not going to be able to scheme against their defense very much. Now the good news is for Nebraska is that um, Lovey probably can't change his defense too awful much in a short period of time without a week off. If he had had a bye week in a situation like we just dealt with Ohio State, I'd be more concerned. But what he is going to do is he's going to have different tendencies in terms of how frequently he blitzes, what kind of blitzes within their package he uses, and he'll be able to tweak a few things, right, in terms of how they do it, when they do it, etc. So that could make things interesting. But with Nebraska's offense, if it's operating at a high level, which it's been able to do in spots over these last few weeks, when that offense is clicking, then it's very hard for the defense to dictate anything to the offense because the offense is snapping the ball so damn fast. The defense is just trying to get lined up right.
That's
That's
right.
their number one goal in life is to just line up right.
I should have mentioned this during the Ohio State game. You'll recall that Nebraska got the ball on the initial kickoff, and we had a nice drive and scored a touchdown. And then on the second series, they 3-and-outed us, or was close to 3-and-out. And the commentators mentioned
it was a 3-and-out.
And the commentators mentioned that the OSU defensive line coach had mentioned on the sideline, like, "Oh, we picked up a tell on their offensive line, and we're going to exploit that and not let them score again." And that seemed to kind of work for a while, but we managed to kind of get some stuff going again later on it there in the half. Did you notice anything like that we had adjusted in response to their adjustment?
No, I haven't been able to see it. There's been some conversation on some of the bulletin boards that I frequent, and I think that there was some encouragement. I don't know if it'll happen of those folks that are within the media on those bulletin boards or represent those bulletin board sites. That would be a great question to ask Scott Frost. When you get a press conference opportunity with him, to say, hey, there was an indication during the broadcast about the fact that our offensive linemen were showing in some way where they were planning to run the ball. And the fact that they picked up on that, allowed them to stop our running game a little bit. And hopefully he has learned from that, whatever it was. And it can be a lot of different things. It could be spacing. It could be whether they're off the line of scrimmage or, on the line of scrimmage. There's all kinds of things, or how they position themselves, if they are leaning a certain way. So there's a lot of little things like that can be picked up, and it definitely helps because it's a tendency that maybe that offensive line is doing without even knowing it.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah.
Hopefully we'll get that cleaned up.
Yep, well, we'll have to look into that. But tying that back into the Illinois game, just looking at some of their scores, their record for this year is 4-5. And in some of the games where they've lost big. They've gotten like 60 points thrown up on them, 40 points, 50 points. So going off of that, I think we will definitely be in the end zone sometimes. I think our offense will have some success, but the bigger question is how will our defense do against their running game, because clearly they're capable of scoring plenty of points too. So I have a sneaky suspicion it might be a high scoring game.
I think you're correct. I don't think either of these teams have what would be considered even an average defense at this point. So it should be like a casino game this weekend as far as points go, and that's always frightening because that means you can no lead is safe, and you can never feel comfortable with what's going on in a game until it's over. So I'm hoping that our defense rises to the occasion. They're a team that hasn't shown great propensity or effectiveness in the passing game. So, you'd like to hope that we could be at a point in the season where we might be able to play a little bit more man to man on their wide receivers, and devote a little bit of our safeties interest to the running game, so that we stop the run and we fill gaps and we really focus on stopping the run, and put our corners on the island a little bit, and challenge them to shut down those passing lanes, so that basically it's not about making interceptions now. It's about making the quarterback make the perfect pass. Just
Right.
cover the guy so that he has to make a perfect pass for that to be a completion. And in the meantime, we're going to give him little time, because we're going to be aggressive, and not give them a lot of time to sit back there and pick us apart. And running game wise, they're not going to run the football on. But they have some talent on those running backs and stuff. So I don't know, but I'm hopeful that's what we'll do. That we'll load the box a little bit and basically dare them to throw it, and then do well enough to slow them down.
Yep. And speaking of our own rushing game, was there anything said after the Ohio State game about Washington? I know he kind of got dinged up. They took a look at him in the locker room, and then he was back out later in the game.
But he still didn't have any explosiveness. If you watch him on the play early in the game, it was like the third series. No, it was the second series. It was a third down play, and they took him out wide, and he did a little slant pass, and Martinez threw him the ball, and it didn't even look like he was ready. And it's because if you watch that on replay, when he plants his left foot to turn inward, he's flanked to the left, and then he goes out for a short little pass, and he plants and he turns left, and his knee buckled just a little bit when he planted on that left foot, and then he was kind of gimpy the whole rest of the game. And I think that's what it was. They were looking at something in his left leg. I'm thinking it was his knee, might have been his ankle, could have been something else, but definitely in that left leg area, left hip, and he didn't look right. And even after that, he did not have any explosion. So I'm really hopeful. Frankly, I'd love it if he's really hurting, find a way not to play him this week. Let the next guy up, whoever that next guy is, whether it's Bradley or Mazur or Wilbon, let somebody else get the snaps and get Washington healthy. Don't send him out there and have him tear his knee all up and blow up a knee, at this point in the season, because something was already kind of tweaked.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah.
I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful he's fine, but if he's not, doggone it, we better not play him.
Yeah, I agree with that. So, what is your official prediction for the Nebraska-Illinois game?
Well, I think it's going to be a victory for us. I really do. I know there's plenty of people out there that are, from a fan standpoint, are worried about, this is a letdown game, et cetera, and it might very well be. I mean, I can see the logic of this being a little bit of a trap game for us, and maybe not having our best performance. And this is an Illinois team that's very dangerous because of that offensive capability that they have. But I feel like our home crowd is going to be super energized for this game. It's going to be cold though, and it's going to be a morning game. Like it's the overnight low Friday night into Saturday morning is supposed to be like 19 or 18 degrees, and so game time is 11 o'clock local time there in Lincoln, and so they'll be lucky if they're hitting 30 degrees by the start of the game time. Now, it might get upwards into 38, 39 by the end of the game, but the beginning of the game is going to be very cold. And this is going to be Martinez's first game in this kind of weather, because he's from California. So I just think that there's a chance we could struggle a little bit offensively more than we have, lately. But I'm hopeful that our defense kind of turned the corner a little bit, came of age a little bit, and we've added some features here. We're starting to play Colin Miller more, and J.J. Doman has become a starter, and they have solidified that second level for us, the linebacker position. And if those guys are healthy and ready to play, more minutes, I think that can ultimately be a very good thing for our defense and make us better at stopping the run and the pass. So just make us better defensively. And that will be the difference in the game. So I'm going to say Nebraska's going to win it. But I think the score is maybe going to be a little less than it has been. Now, that's not to say it's going to be a low scoring game, but I'm going to say it's going to be something like, um, let's see here, 36-24.
36 to
Nebraska.
24. All right. Cool. I'm thinking similar, but I'm going to go a little higher scoring. I'm going to say 42-31 Nebraska victory. I'm going to predict that they will have some success running the football against us, especially if they kind of if they have success and some long drives, they might find more success in the fourth quarter. And I hadn't thought about the weather thing like you mentioned, but that might give an additional advantage to having a strong running game rather than focusing on the passing game if you've got cold fingers on your quarterback or what have you. But I agree. I like to think that we have turned a corner in this season compared to where we were in the first half, and I definitely think Illinois is a beatable team. And I think, like you said about us going 3-0 or 0-3 here, I think if we lose this Illinois game, I'm extra concerned about playing Michigan State and then Iowa to close out the season. Whereas if we can get a victory, and capitalize on the momentum we got from the Ohio State close game, then I think I feel better about our team's trajectory moving into those final two games.
I would totally, and I think it's really important. And I think Scott and his staff understand that now too. I think they look at this game and they're going to be laser focused on winning this football game because I believe they understand it sets the table not only for what happens the rest of this year, but it sets the table for the trajectory of the team and its mental belief and the whole cultural thing and buy-in. I mean, if we could find a way to win this weekend, and that puts us in a position to maybe make some noise with these last two games, because again, Michigan State's an improved football team, but they're still imperfect, and a team that we can beat at home. And then the final game of the year, of course, will be against Iowa, and Iowa now will have lost to Purdue. Potentially, they're going to lose this weekend to Northwestern. So they're going to be a team that will be coming into our game having only maybe one game in the three. And so that will certainly make them a little bit more vulnerable from a confidence standpoint. And if we're riding a high of, basically winning 4 of our last 5 games, then all of a sudden that game, even though it's in Iowa City, has a little bit more of an equal feel to it.
Mm-hmm. Yep, we would certainly hope so. So looking at, in terms of predicting other games for this upcoming week, I think we can focus on the two Big Ten games that are going to be key, Northwestern Iowa and Ohio State, Michigan State. So why don't we start with the Northwestern Iowa matchup? What's your prediction there?
Wow. I'm going to tell you, I'm predicting an Iowa victory here. And here's why. That Notre Dame game was a big deal for Northwestern. It's the first time that Northwestern and Notre Dame have played a lot, but oftentimes they've played down in South Bend, or when they've played up in Chicago, it's been at like Soldier Field and places like that where the attendance was, it was more of a spectacle, right? And it wasn't about Northwestern. This game last week was about Northwestern, and I think they invested a lot in it. And the fact that they lost, even though they had fought back to make it interesting, they are just going to be a team that's a little spent emotionally, energy-wise, and I think Iowa is always very tough at home. And frankly, we played Northwestern and should have beaten them, frankly, pretty comfortably, if we just don't make some stupid mistakes and maybe have a little better play calling down the stretch. We win that game comfortably. And so that leads me to a belief that Iowa is going to bounce back from their loss to Purdue, and they're going to win.
Okay.
Score, Do I have to give a score? I have to give a score. Um, Jeez. So I think it's going to be a relatively low scoring game because they're going to be probably experiencing that same cold weather that Nebraska's experiencing in Lincoln. So I'm going to say it's going to be one of these 24-17 Iowa victory.
All right, 24-17. I think that's reasonable. I tell you what, I like your score, but I'm going to flip it. I'm going to say that Northwestern wins 24-17.
That wouldn't surprise me.
I think, yeah, I think that, even though they lost against Notre Dame, they played well against them clearly. And, this is some of, I mean, I don't know their history that well, but this has got to be one of the best seasons they've had in quite some time, being in the lead for, going to the Big Ten championship in the division and everything. So I think they're going to be motivated to play. And they've proven, against us, that even if they are down, they are a team that doesn't make mistakes and has a good mental toughness to them that they can pull it out at the end. So that we might see a similar situation where Iowa looks like they've got it and then Northwestern pulls it out at the end.
Yep, I could see that happening. There's no doubt.
Yep.
No doubt.
No doubt. And then we've got Ohio State, Michigan State on the other side of the conference.
Wow. This one is so hard. So hard. Michigan State seems to have turned a corner with when they beat Purdue. And then they turned around and won this week as well. Who did they play?
Maryland.
Maryland, that's right. And they dominated. They were very physical. They ran the ball well. It was the kind of game they really needed, Now it sounds like Lewerke came back and got the starting job back. So even though the other kid had come in and played well, as soon as Lewerke was healthy, they went back to him at quarterback. And Ohio State is just not, like you said, is not the team that we thought they were earlier in the season. They're a team that seems to be a little quirky, but they kind of started discovering their running game at the end of the Nebraska game. And really took it to us a little bit at the end. And that was the difference in the game with us. So the question is, can they produce enough offense against a very stout Michigan State defense to win it? And East Lansing.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, God. That's a tough one. Do you know what you want to pick as your score and everything? Have you thought more about this? This is a tough one for me.
Yeah, I agree it's a tough one, and I just looked it up. It is in East Lansing, like you said. But yep. I think, like you said, Ohio State was definitely getting something going near the end of our game. They said that they wanted to focus on establishing a running game, and they were doing that more. Against us now, Michigan State's defense is better than ours. But I think Ohio State's just raw talent will bleed through. And we've seen Michigan State struggle to score against good defenses like they did against Michigan earlier in the season. So I think I'm going to predict, let's say, 28 for Ohio State and 17 for Michigan State.
That's really a good score. Good job, Alex. I kind of think the same way. I'm going to go just slightly higher, and let's go 35 for Ohio State and 21, 23, and 23 for Michigan State.
All right. Interesting score. All right. We'll throw it in there. So we'll see how all those play out. And we will be back next week to talk about the Illinois game and the results from these Week 11 games. Hopefully also we hope to do some podcasts maybe after the playoff rankings come out so that we can discuss those as well. As we get close to the end of the year, those will get more and more interesting to talk about.
They will. And I, you're not going to see a whole lot of change this week except for that Michigan or Oklahoma popping in there into that fourth spot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm going to look up real quick. I think Michigan was playing a lesser team, I think. Well, let's find out. With the power of
Apple.
Yeah,
they do. They play like
Rutgers.
They play Maryland, Rutgers. Okay, yep.
Yep.
So I think they play Rutgers and then Maryland and then Ohio State.
Actually, it's Indiana after Rutgers.
Indiana, then Ohio State. Okay.
So they
yeah.
they should be only have their one loss going into that Ohio State game.
Well, absolutely, and having been kicking some tail too. I mean, they obviously beat the heck out of Penn State. You would expect the Rutgers score to be a lopsided one, and frankly, the Indiana score to be a lopsided one. So they will be coming in off of, some really dominant performances where their offense has got a great deal more confidence than they had early in the season. Their defense has always been confident, and it just seems to be raising the bar now that the offense is doing better. The defense is just taking it to another level.
Yep. Seems that way. So there'll be a lot to talk about next week. If you all enjoyed listening to this podcast, you can find us online at footballthrowdown.podomatic.com. You can leave a comment there, let us know what you think of the podcast, or you can find us on iTunes or Apple Podcasts on your mobile phone. If you could search College Football Throwdown, you will find us. We always like hearing from the fans, getting feedback, constructive criticism. So thank you all out there for listening, and thank you for hosting with me, Dad. And until next week, go Big Red.
Go Big Red.